My name is Eddie Usher. I am 29 years old. And last Christmas, my dad looked me in the eye and called me an idiot for keeping a gift from my grandmother. The gift was a check for $5 million. He tore his up. My mom tore hers up. My sister dropped hers into the fireplace and filmed the flames. My brother crumpled his under the table like a gum wrapper. I was the only one who folded mine into my purse and said, "Thank you." The next morning, a bank manager locked the door behind us, sat me down, and said 4 words I will never forget. My family spent the rest of that year trying to take back what they had laughed at and what they did to get it changed everything I thought I knew about my own blood. Before we go on, please like and subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is. I read everyone. Now, let me take you back to Christmas Eve to the last dinner my grandmother ever cooked. My grandmother never locked her front door, not in 47 years. And that December, the house smelled the same as it had the first time I visited her when I was 4. Oakwood smoke from the fireplace, banana bread cooling on the butcher block, and something bitter underneath. Something I didn't put a name to until later. I came up the hill in my old Subaru with a paper bag of apples from the tree I'd planted behind my rental, and she met me at the door in her corn yellow sweater and the apron she'd been wearing since her hip first started to ache. She kissed my forehead the way she always did, with one hand on me jaw, like she was double-checking I was still the same person. "Tell me about your class," she said. She said it every Saturday. She always meant it. We sat at the kitchen table with mismatched teacups, and I told her about Daniel, a 3rd grader who wouldn't speak in group work, but could write paragraphs that left me a little shaken. She listened with her whole face. She asked me what I thought Daniel needed. I said, "Patience," she said, "then give him Saturdays." I told her about the bed I'd bought at the flea market, a spindle frame missing a drawer, and she laughed into her tea and said it was probably haunted by a farmer who would not approve of my reading habits. Her hand shook a little when she set the cup back down. I pretended I didn't see it. We knitted for a while. She was working on something small and gray that she wouldn't show me. I was trying badly to finish a scarf I'd started in October. Outside the window, the cardinal she fed came down to the feeder and took one seed and left the way he always did. She watched him like he was somebody she'd been expecting. When I left, she pressed a thick envelope into my hand on the porch. Inside were 2 crisp $10 bills for gas. She gave me the same envelope every month, and I never cashed it. I kept them in a shoe box under my bed because what she was giving me wasn't gas money. I didn't know it yet, but that was the 3rd to last Saturday afternoon I would ever have with her. I drove back down the hill whistling. My mother never called me to ask how I was. She called to tell me how she was and to find out what I had and to decide if she needed some of it. She caught me on the drive home 10 miles out of town, the turn signal ticking like a small metronome inside my dashboard. "Eddie, honey, are you up visiting the old lady again?" That was what my mother called my father's mother. Never Grandma, never Sylvia, the old lady. "I go on Saturdays, Mom." Every Saturday she sighed the way she sighed when she wanted me to feel unreasonable. "She's fine, sweetheart. She has her pension." My older brother Grant was there with her. I could hear him chewing something. "Eddie, I need a ride to Dan's garage Monday. Truck's out again." "I have class Monday, Grant." "So, afternoon then." My sister Holland texted while I was still on the phone. She lived an hour away in a bigger town with a husband she posted about and rarely mentioned otherwise. "Hey babe, can you float me $200 just this week? I'll hit you back. Promise." 3 emojis. My mother kept talking over the silence. "Christmas dinner. Your father wants roast. Make sure she doesn't cook for hours this year, Eddie. She gets so tired and then she sits there looking at us." Nobody asked if my grandmother was feeling well. Nobody asked if her hip was worse. Nobody asked why her hand might be shaking when she poured the tea. I realized I had been waiting quietly on the off chance that any of them might, and I made a small decision on a snow-wet county road that I did not explain to myself until much later. "I'll see you Christmas Eve," I said. "And Eddie." My mother's voice dropped into the tone she used for advice. "Don't let her rope you into moving in. She has her pride, but she'll take advantage of yours. I clicked off. My father hadn't even been on the line, but I could hear him anyway, the way you can hear a clock in a house you grew up in. He'd been telling me for years not to let his mother dupe me. He used words like dupe. I had never once in my life seen my grandmother try to dupe a single soul. The first thing my grandmother asked me to promise her was not to save her life. It was to keep her secret. She told me on a Saturday at the end of October in her garden while we were cutting back rosemary for the winter. The light was low and orange, the kind of light you only get in a garden that's been planted by the same hands for 40 years. She set her shears down on the bench and sat down heavier than usual. You remember Dr. Preya? She said Dr. Ackheffer. Of course I went to see her Tuesday. It waited. I'd learned long ago that my grandmother told you things in her own time, and trying to rush her was like trying to rush a tomato. Pancreatic, she said. Stage 4. I've known since July. The bench felt like it tilted. I didn't cry. I don't know why. I think some part of me had known for months. The way you know a season is ending before you see a single leaf fall. Chemo, I asked. She shook her head. No, I'd like to spend what I have here in this garden at the kitchen table with Ma on Wednesdays, not on a drip. Grandma, I am 82. Eddie, I have had a very long, very interesting life. She took my hand. Her fingers were cold but steady. I am not sad, I am sorting. She pinched off a sprig of rosemary and pressed it into my palm. The smell of it has not left me since. I have one thing to ask you, she said. Don't tell them. Grandma, I want Christmas to be Christmas. I do not want it to be a deathbed. I do not want your father writing his eulogy at the table. Shahaf smiled. I want roast chicken and bad wine. I want one more year of pretending he is the man I raised. She got a glint. Then the old one, the one that meant she was about to say something that would leave a mark. Besides, she said, I have a few things to give out first. It's going to be a very interesting Christmas. I didn't sleep that night. 5 days later was Thanksgiving. A month later was Christmas, and nothing she said was ever accidental. Every member of my family walked into Migranmother's house that Christmas Eve with a shopping list in their head disguised as affection. My father came in first, stomping snow off his boots like a man claiming a room. Richard Usher had the kind of posture that had served him for 30 years at the machine parts plant and would in 3 months not be enough to keep him employed. He hung his coat on the good hook. He opened the fridge without asking. My mother came in behind him, already complimenting things. Oh, the tree is darling this year. She was appraising the tree. I watched her eyes move across the garlands and the silver star my grandfather had soldered in 1974, and I could see her counting. Grant brought his girlfriend, who looked 18 and wasn't, and he barely said hello to our grandmother. He did say hello to me. Still teaching those kids, huh? When are you going to get a real job? He grinned like it was a joke. It wasn't a joke, but it wasn't entirely cruel either, which was worse. Holland arrived last, phone already up, filming a video for her followers. Cozy grandma vibes, my loves. You have to see this fireplace. She did not hug my grandmother. She kissed the air near her cheek and went back to her angles. My grandmother moved slowly from the stove to the table in her corn yellow sweater. She did not say much. She watched her family with the calm, attentive look I had seen her wear for 30 years of family gatherings. The look of a woman who had long ago stopped being surprised. She caught my eye once, and she smiled, and she looked like she was in on a joke with somebody who had not yet arrived. Margaret Eero, who had been my grandmother's best friend since 1974 and owned the used bookstore on Elm, stopped by with a jar of honey and stayed for 10 minutes. Before she left, she touched my arm in the hallway. You are the only one of them she ever talks about. Mag said, you know that, I hope. Bing Crosby was on the kitchen radio, skipping a beat the way it had skipped since 1997. Nobody fixed it. Nobody ever had. The turkey fat hissed in the pan, and Migrandmother pulled a small wooden box from beside her chair and set it on the table where nobody noticed. My grandmother handed out 5 identical envelopes that night, and by the time the roast was cold, 4 of them had been destroyed in front of her. She waited until everyone had eaten. She stood up slowly with one hand on the back of her chair, and she cleared her throat in the small, precise way she cleared her throat before a speech. My family kept talking. They always kept talking. I have something I'd like to give each of you, she said. Grant rolled his eyes at Holland. Holland rolled hers back. Grandma opened the wooden box. She took out 5 envelopes, cream-colored, unsealed, and she walked each one around the table and placed it beside each person. Mine was last. She touched my shoulder when she sat it down. My father opened his first because my father opened everything first. I watched his face go from expectation to confusion to something that tightened like a fist. Inside was a check. It was from First National Hollow Ridge. It was made out in my grandmother's slanted blue ink handwriting. It was for $5 million. Grant laughed before he'd even read his. He leaned over. He saw the number. He laughed harder. Grandma, is this a joke? You making us play Monopoly? Holland giggled and held hers up to the light like a piece of costume jewelry. My mother's face did something strange. She looked for a second like a child who had been handed a kindness she didn't know how to hold. Then my father said loud and flat, "It's fake, don't be an idiot." He dropped his check onto his plate. Gravy soaked into the corner. My mother tore hers in half slowly and set the halves beside her wine glass. Mother, really? It isn't funny. Grant crumpled his into a ball and flicked it under the table. And Holland. Holland stood up and walked to the fireplace and dropped hers in. The flame caught the paper by the corner, and I watched the number 5 with 6 zeros behind it blacken and curl into a little red shape and disappear. My grandmother did not blink. She looked only at me. I took mine. I folded it in half once and put it in the inside pocket of my purse. "Thank you, Grandma," I said. She nodded. Just once. Nobody else noticed. I drove home that night holding on to the steering wheel the way you hold on to a pew during a funeral hymn, because otherwise your hands will shake. The snow was coming down heavy by then. The wipers had an uneven rhythm, a right then left offbeat that I had learned over 4 winters to find comforting. I counted it while I drove. I did it the way Daniel in my 3rd grade counted his fingers when he got overwhelmed. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. My grandmother had watched 4 of her grandchildren and her son mock her to her face, and she had not blinked. She had only looked at me. She was not senile. She was the sharpest person I had ever known. She read the Sunday paper front to back and made marginal notes. She beat me at bridge every second week and bought her a bar of chocolate on the weeks she didn't. She had once caught an error on my federal tax return from memory. And 2 weeks before Christmas in the garden, she had asked me a question that had seemed at the time like one of her odd, quiet questions. If you had $1 million, Eddie, what would you do first? I had laughed. I don't know. Get new supplies for my class, probably. We're out of dry erase markers. She had nodded as if I had said the right thing on a test. At home, I put the check on my kitchen table and stood over it under the yellow overhead light. The paper was heavy. The security weave, when I tilted it, moved like oil on water. The routing number matched First National Hollow Ridge, which I had walked past every day of my working life. The signature was my grandmother's, the same signature I had seen on every birthday card since I could read. I turned it over. On the back, in her same blue ink, she had written in her slanted, unhurried hand for the one who still comes on Saturdays. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I sat there for a long time. The check was on the table above me. Outside, the snow did that thing it does at night where it makes everything muffled and far and close at the same time. In the morning, I would go to the bank, not to cash it, just to ask. The manager at First National Hollow Ridge had known me since I was 16, and I had never seen his face turn that color. His name was Benedict Strom. He had a mustache he'd kept since before it came back into style and a small plastic horse on his desk that I had always assumed was from a child who had grown up. He smiled when he saw me come in. He did not smile a minute later. "Mr. Stum, I'm sorry to bother you the day after Christmas. I took out the check. I just wanted to verify this. My grandmother gave it to me last night and I didn't. I slid the paper across the desk. He looked at it. His smile hesitated. Then something behind his eyes flicked and he picked the check up with both hands and his face did the thing I had only read about in books. It lost color. It went the color of the inside of an envelope. Eddie. He said my name the way a doctor does. Can you come with me a minute? He stood up. He walked ahead of me. Past the tellers, past the Christmas wreath on the vault, and he opened the door of a small private room with a long table and no windows. He held the door for me. He shut it. He turned the little latch. Have a seat. Is it real? He sat across from me. He folded his hands. He looked at the check, then at me, then at the check. Eddie, he said, have you read what's wrote on the back? Yes, okay. He took a breath. Your grandmother came in the first week of November. She moved funds into a special account. She had 5 of these drafted. I was the one who put them on paper, Eddie. They are as real as the chair you're sitting in. I counted backward from 10, the way I tell Daniel to, and I looked at the little plastic horse on the corner of his desk. Ma'am, Benedict's voice got very professional. I'm going to ask you to sit down. This is real. All of it is real. He paused, and this is only part of it. There's a lawyer named Haverson who's going to be in touch with you. I'm not supposed to say more than that. I walked out of the bank with $5 million in my account, and a feeling already that it was not going to be the thing that changed my life that week. My grandmother had been a millionaire for longer than I had been alive, and the only person in our family who had ever thought to ask about her financial advisor was the teller who had cashed her Social Security check. I drove straight from the bank to her house, still in my winter coat, still with that smell of photocopier paper and old coffee from Benedict's back room on my sleeves. She was in the kitchen. She had the coffee on. She was not surprised to see me. She had never once in my 29 years been surprised to see me. You went to the bank. Yes. Was Benedict nice to you? He was terrified. She smiled into her cup. It was the chipped one with the cardinal on it, the one older than I was. She pushed a second one across the table for me. Sit, sweetheart. I sat. Your grandfather left me $400,000 in 1998, she said, and a house and a garden. I did not know what to do with any of it. I was 55. I had been a music teacher for 30 years. I had never bought a stock in my life. I went to the library. I read. I wrote letters to a man in Chicago. He had written a column in a magazine I liked. His name was Mr. Smith. He wrote me back. We corresponded for 17 years. I never met him. He died in 2015. She paused. Hell left me 40% of his firm. Grandma, I have roughly $40 million. Eddie, give or take a market day. I set my coffee down. The cardinal on the cup looked at me with one chipped eye. Why didn't you ever? Because nobody ever asked. She said it without any bitterness. She said it like she was statting the weather. Your father asked me once in 2003 if I needed him to manage my money. I said, no, he never asked again. He did not ask because he wanted to help. He asked because he wanted to control. I am not obliged to hand my life over, not to someone who confuses those two things. She reached across and squeezed my hand. I didn't give them money last night. Eddie, she said, I gave them a last chance to ask me why, and they didn't ask. It took exactly 112 minutes for my family to stop calling that check fake and start calling it theirs. Benedict had to make a compliance call. He called my father because my father was listed on an old shared account from 20 years ago. He did not tell my father details. He told him a wire had posted. It was enough. The first call came while I was still in my grandmother's kitchen. Then another, then another. My phone, face down on the table, buzzed 32 times in 45 minutes. I counted because I couldn't think of what else to do. Holland's texts came in a flood. I need my check. I changed my mind. It was an accident. Eddie, baby, can we talk? I have to pay my storage unit. You don't need that much. Be fair. Grant's voicemail was louder. You give that back. That's family money, you little weasel. You hear me? My mother cried on her voicemail. She cried the special way she cried. The soft performance cry with a hiccup at the end. Eddie, sweetheart, you don't understand what you're doing to this family. I have been so patient. I have never asked you for anything. I looked at my grandmother. She was calm. She was eating a piece of toast. She was watching me with the mild attentiveness of a woman watching a storm she had forecasted. I'm going to turn this off, I said. Good. The knocking started 40 minutes later. My father. I saw his truck pull up through the kitchen window. He came up the walk at that speed he used when he was being reasonable out loud and furious underneath. My grandmother stood up slowly and walked to the front door. She did not open it. She stood in the glass. My father pounded. He tried the handle. "Mom, open the door." "Richard," she said through the glass, "it is the 26th of December. It is not a good time. You gave her $5 million. I gave each of you $5 million. 4 of you burned it. Mom, Richard, go home." She did not raise her voice. "I'll see you when I see you." She turned the lock for the first time in 47 years. My father stood on the porch for a long time. Then he left. My grandmother came back to the table. She picked up her toast. "Well," she said, "that's begun." The week my grandmother broke her hip was the week I stopped pretending I was going to get to keep her. It happened in the yard on a Tuesday in mid-January. She went out tosscatter seed for the cardinal. She slipped on a patch of ice she could not see through the snow. She lay there for 40 minutes before me, driving past on her way to the bookstore, noticed her front door standing half open and stopped. The hospital wanted to admit her. She wanted hospice at home. Hospice at home is what she got. She had written the paperwork for it 3 months earlier, and Haverson had notarized it. I asked for a leave of absence from Briar Hollow Elementary. The principal, a quiet woman named Mrs. Osgood, looked at me a long moment across her desk and said, "You take whatever time you need, Eddie. You come back when you come back." I moved into my grandmother's spare bedroom, the one with the pressed flowers on the wall and the quilt her mother had made. I set up a baby monitor on her nightstand. Theo, the gym teacher, who was a good man and nothing more, drove my things over in his pickup and did not ask me a single intrusive question. My father visited once. He stayed 20 minutes. Had told my grandmother she should let Grant bring her home. She said, "Richard, I am home. He did not come back." Each night I read to her. She liked Willicather, especially my Antonia, which had been a wedding present from her mother. I read slowly. She closed her eyes. Sometimes she corrected my pronunciation of a prairie town name. Sometimes she slept. The honeylemon water on her nightstand would freeze at the edge overnight because the radiator was old and the walls were paper thin. And every morning when I changed it, I would notice with a small, frightened tenderness that my hand was smaller than hers had been and would never be that big. We had both shrunk in our own ways that winter. On a Thursday near the end, she asked me to open the top drawer of her dresser. Inside was a brass key on a leather loop. She put it in my hand. "When Haverson calls you," she said, "give this to him. He will know what it opens. Grandma, not yet, Eddie, but soon. And that's all right. My grandmother died the way she had lived, on her own terms, without making a fuss, and in a room that smelled like old books and wool." It was February 3rd, 2026, a Tuesday, 5:47 in the morning. I know because I looked at the small travel clock she kept on the nightstand. It was the kind of clock with a ticking second hand, a clock that a teacher's husband had given her for their honeymoon in 1962, and it kept bad time, and she had never replaced it. She had been quiet for 2 days. The morning before, she had squeezed my hand and said, "Eddie, I am so proud of you." She had not said a word since. I had been dozing in the chair. I woke because the furnace in the basement clicked off. It clicked off and the house got very, very still. And I understood in a way I did not understand with my mind that she had gone. Her hand was in mine. It was still warm. I did not cry right away. I sat for a while. I listened to the morning. The radiator knocked once. The cardinal came to the feeder. He took 1 seed. He flew away. Then I called me. She was there within the hour. She sat beside the bed and held the other hand. She had been holding that hand since 1974. I called my father next. He picked up on the 4th ring. I told him. He was quiet for a moment, and then his voice cracked, and I thought for a second that he was human after all. Then my mother came on the line, and her first words were, "When is the funeral going to be, Eddie? I have a thing on the 10th. I hung up. The funeral was that Saturday. My grandmother had left written instructions. She wanted her corn yellow sweater. She wanted to be buried beside her husband in the small cemetery behind the Lutheran church that she had never once attended. She wanted no eulogy from Richard. She wanted me to read a poem. They all came. They cried loudly. My father wore a black suit that did not fit him anymore. My mother clung to his arm. Holland filmed the procession from behind her sunglasses. I saw her post it later with a filter that softened the edges. The caption said, "Healing." I did not film anything. I did not cry until that night. I want to stop for a second right here. If you've walked this far with me, if you've ever lost someone who loved you more than you ever thought you deserved, give this story a like and in the comments below, tell me their name. I read every single one. I'm asking because the part that comes next is the part I wasn't sure I had the strength to tell. And having you here makes it easier. Stay with me. Let's go back. My father called the lawyer before the gravediggers had finished their coffee. Haverson told me later because Haverson tells you things in his own time and because he was, among other things, funny. He said my father had left 3 voicemails by noon on the day of the funeral. All of them asked when the will would be read. Grant came to my house the next evening. He walked in without knocking because we had grown up in a house where nobody knocked, and he sat on the edge of my couch in his funeral suit and asked me without preamble, "Do you know who she left the house to?" "No, Grant, you were there every week." She must have said, "We didn't talk about it." "Come on, Eddie. We talked about my kids at school. We talked about her garden. We talked about bridge. I don't know what's in her will, and I don't care what's in her will." He looked at me for a long moment. The way Grant looks at people when he's trying to figure out if they're lying. Grant has never been a good reader of people. He took a beer out of my fridge without asking and left. Haverson called me the following Monday. He was exactly as I remembered from the one time I had met him at my grandmother's table. A tall, slow man in a gray suit with a voice like a cello string. "Miss Usher, your grandmother retained me for many years. There will be a reading of her will at my office. February 20th, 10 in the morning. All immediate family is named. I would like you to be there." "All right, Eddie," he paused. "There is a safe deposit box here in my office that she arranged for. I will ask you at that reading if you have a key. I have it." "Good. Mr. Haverson, can I ask you a question?" "You may." "Did she tell you what's in the will?" He was quiet for a long time. "She did, yes." "Is it going to surprise anyone?" He laughed once, a dry laugh. "Miss Usher, it will surprise every single person in that room except you and me and even you. I think a little. The day of the will reading was Friday. I put on a gray dress. I drove into town with an assumption that was entirely wrong. My father used the exact same words when he heard the will that he had used when he tore up the check. He said, "Is this a joke?" And then he said it again, a little louder, as if the room had not heard. Haverson's conference room had a wood-paneled clock on the wall, and that clock ticked louder than any clock I had ever heard in my life. My father sat on one side of the table. My mother sat next to him with her hand on his sleeve. Grant sat across. Holland sat at the end, scrolling until Haverson asked her to put the phone in her purse. Mag sat beside me. I had asked her to come. My grandmother had asked her to come. Haverson opened a dark green folder. He put on his reading glasses. He did not look at any of us. "This is the last will and testament of Sylvia Marigold Usher. Dated April 14th, 2022. Witnessed by Margaret Eero and Dr. Priya Akaffer. Notarized in my presence." He read the preamble. He read the list of specific bequests, the cardinal teacup to me, the bridge set to Meg, the soldered star to the Lutheran church, the piano to the elementary school. My father's jaw was already set. The principal remainder of the estate, Haverson read, comprising the family residence at 114 Linen Hollow Road, the surrounding 23 acres, all investment accounts, all remaining personal effects valued at approximately $40.2 million net of the 5 gifts already distributed. The clock was very loud. The testator leaves the entirety of this remainder to her granddaughter, Eddie Rosemary Usher. Nobody spoke. The clock ticked. My father's face did not change for a full 3 seconds. Then he stood up. "Is this a joke? Mr. Usher, please sit down. Is this a joke? It is not a joke. It is a legal document. Please sit down." My mother let out a small sound, a sound like a teacup set down too hard. Grant's eyes were on me. Holland had pulled her phone back out. Haverson read the attached reason clause in the same steady voice. "I leave this to my granddaughter, Eddie. She is the only one who visited me on Saturdays. She came for no reason other than love. She cared for me at the end of my life. She never once asked what I had. My father sat down. He stared at the table. Me beside me took my hand under the table. I held on. The lawsuit arrived in the mail 4 days after the will was read, and I knew before I opened it which of them had been the one to type it first. It was a heavy manila envelope. I smelled the paper. I don't know why. Stress does strange things. The paper smelled like paper, and the lawyer's office it had come from smelled like toner and old leather. And both of those smells came through. The complaint was filed on behalf of Richard Usher, Linda Usher, Grant Usher, and Holland Usher Briggs. The cause of action was undue influence. They were alleging that I had manipulated an elderly, ailing woman into leaving me her entire estate. I sat on the floor of my kitchen and laughed. It was not a good laugh. It was the laugh you make when the only alternative is to throw something. I called Haverson. He had been expecting it. I will represent you, Miss Usher, free of charge. I owe your grandmother 3 decades of her trust. Let me finish what she started. I called Theo next. Theo was in his driveway scraping ice off his car, and he picked up on speaker. Should I try to settle Theo? Just give them something. He was quiet for a second. I could hear the scrape of the ice. Eddie, he said, you didn't do anything wrong. And your grandma knew exactly what she was doing. Giving in would be the only way to disrespect her. Okay. That was the whole call. That's the kind of friend Theo was. My father sent an email the next morning. Subject line, family meeting, text. Eddie, we need to sit down. This has gone too far. Dad, I forwarded it to Haverson. Haverson replied on my behalf. Polite, professional, referring all communication to his office. Holland began posting veiled videos. She sat in her car, no makeup, and talked for 7 minutes about a family betrayal she could not get into for legal reasons. Her followers rallied. Stay strong, Queen. Family is everything. I'm so sorry, babe. I watched 2 of them. It did not watch the 3rd. My grandmother had been in the ground for 18 days. The case would not be heard until October. Haverson said probate moved slow. Contested probate moved slower. I would have to live for 7 and 2 months with my family's names on a lawsuit with mine on it. I went back to work on Monday. Daniel was happy to see me. The safe my grandmother had given me the key to did not contain stocks or deeds. It contained proof that she had been paying attention. Haverson drove out to the house with me on a Saturday in May. The lilacs were starting. He walked through the rooms with the quiet respect of a man who had known the woman who had lived in them. The safe was in the back of her bedroom closet behind a row of cardigans. He watched as I turned the brass key. Inside were 3 things. The first was a thick legal folder. The will, the notarizations, the 3 capacity evaluations Dr. Acapper had performed over the years. Every one of them clean, every one of them dated, every one of them signed. Haverson smiled a small, grim smile. Your grandmother, he said, understood litigation. The second was a bundle of letters. Every birthday card I had ever sent her, beginning with a crayon drawing from when I was 4, she had kept them all. She had labeled them by year in small pencil on the backs. The third was a leather album. I did not know what it was at first. It was green, soft-cornered, bound with a shoelace she had replaced at least once. I opened it on the floor of her bedroom. It was a journal, a kind of journal. On each page in her slanted hand was a single entry, a date, a few words, sometimes a pressed leaf or a feather or a ticket stub. February 5th, 2015. Eddie came. We read about the Nebraska prairie. She cried a little at the part with the plow. October 22nd, 2016. Eddie came, brought apples, helped with the roof gutter. August 19th, 2018. Eddie came tired from her first week of teaching. We both napped every Saturday I had come. Every single one going back a decade. Going back further than I had realized I had been coming. 487 entries. I counted them later sitting on the bed. On page 112, there was a tea stain faint brown. Her note underneath said, Eddie brought pie. I spilled much laughter. I cried for the first time since the funeral. I cried into my own sleeve on her bedroom floor while Haverson stood in the hallway and pretended kindly to be looking at the view. I was not alone in the courtroom. She had counted every Saturday. The judge who ruled on my grandmother's had gone to high school with her in 1962, and she said that twice before the hearing began. Her name was Judge Bernadette Ames, and she recused herself routinely from cases where the relationship was closer than passing acquaintance. She and my grandmother had been classmates in a graduating class of 51. That was acquaintance. She could hear the case. She announced it in open court, and my family's lawyer did not object because he knew, I think, that he had nothing better to wait for. Haverson was calm. He walked the judge through the will, the medical evaluations, the witness affidavit. Dr. Priya Akhafer took the stand in a navy suit and spoke with the clean, bored precision of a woman who had testified before. She had evaluated my grandmother 3 times. Once in 2022, at the time of the will signing, once in 2023 as a follow-up, once in 2024 because my grandmother had insisted. All 3 evaluations concluded full testamentary capacity. The 3rd had been performed 11 weeks before she died. Me took the stand next. Me wore hair-eating glasses and a small silver pin Sylvia had given her for her 50th birthday. Your Honor, Sylvia Usher and I played bridge every Wednesday for 40 years. In her last week, she remembered the hand I misplayed in September of 1987. She still teased me about it. Me looked at my father when she said the next part. She was not influenced by anyone. She was the most unpersuadable person I have ever known. Then the family lawyer cross-examined me. I had been dreading it. I had rehearsed. I did not need Tohave rehearsed. Miss Usher, did you ever suggest to your grandmother how she should allocate her estate? No. Did you discuss her finances with her? No, I didn't know she had any to speak of. Did you ever encourage her to favor you? No, sir. Then why, in your opinion, did she leave you everything? I had not been prepared for that question. I thought for a moment. I looked at Mag. I looked at the empty seat beside her that nobody had sat in. I came because it was Saturday, Your Honor, I said. That was the whole reason. The judge wrote something on her pad. I could not read it. She looked up. The court finds the will valid as executed. The contest is dismissed. Plaintiffs to bear defendants' reasonable attorney's fees. Haverson squeezed my shoulder once. I did not look at my father. My father called me his worst daughter in front of a local journalist, and by Tuesday the Hollow Ridge Chronicle had printed the phrase in a pull quote. It happened in the marble hallway outside courtroom 3. I was walking with Haverson toward the stairs. My father came out of the restroom on the opposite wall, and he saw me and something he had been holding for 9 months let go. You are the worst daughter I have ever had, Eddie. His voice bounced. Marble is unkind to anger. 3 people turned their heads, including a young woman with a notepad and a press badge from the Chronicle. She did not look away. She made a small deliberate note. I did not respond. I kept walking. Haverson beside me put a hand on my elbow and steered me gently past. Grant followed. Don't you feel guilty? He said behind me, not quite shouting, not even a little. I stopped. I turned. Grant had been my older brother for 34 years. He had pushed me into a pool when I was 6. He had helped me move 3 times. He had borrowed money and never returned it. He had come over for Thanksgiving without calling. He had stood at my grandmother's coffin with dry eyes. No, Grant, I said. Not even a little. Holland had been live streaming from inside the courtroom. The bailiff had asked her to put the phone away twice. She had ignored him. Her video was pulled by the platform within an hour for violating broadcast in court policies. She lost, according to a comment she made later, 7,000 followers in a single afternoon. She had crossed the line from a grieved cousin to embarrassing spectacle in front of an audience that had been paying her. I drove home that afternoon and sat in the cold kitchen and drank tea. Theo came by with dinner he did not pretend to have cooked. We ate in silence. The Chronicle piece ran on Tuesday morning. The headline was measured. Probate court upholds contested will in Usher estate. The body was factual, but there was a pull quote. My father's words verbatim said in a box on the 2nd page, and there was a small detail I did not notice at first in the closing paragraph. Mr. Usher was laid off from his position at a regional parts manufacturer earlier this year. The manufacturer announced closure in March. It was not a vindictive detail. It was a reporter doing her job, but it ran in a town that read every word. A small town has a long memory, especially for people who burn money in front of the dying. My mother's spa had a grand opening banner that had been there for 2 years, faded pink, hanging slightly off the corner of the awning. It started losing clients in the 3rd week of November. Not all at once. A Tuesday regular stopped booking. A Friday regular. The woman who owned the flower shop across the street, who had been friendly with my grandmother in the choir, walked past the spa for 3 weeks without looking in. My mother called me in December and cried and asked if I could help. I said no, gently, and she hung up. Grant's construction office, the one he had been running out of a rented corner of a warehouse, was repossessed in late January. He had been 3 months behind on rent. The landlord who had gone to school with my father had been patient. The local paper ran the filing in the back section the way it ran all the filings. People read the back section. My father did not find another job. He put in for work at 3 places. He did not get a single call back. He was 58 and he had spent 30 years at one manufacturer, and he was in the job market, a species that had been declared extinct. My mother moved back in with her sister in Ohio in November. My father stayed in the house I had grown up in. He did not invite anyone over. And then there was Holland. The story the Chronicle had printed had been picked up briefly modestly by a regional human interest blog, which had led to a follow-up comment thread, which had led to a message a woman in Akron sent to Holland's husband Marcus about certain credit card balances belonging to a certain wife that seemed inconsistent with the household income. Marcus, who had been suspecting something for a year, checked. He found $80,000 of debt Holland had been hiding. He filed for divorce in April. Holland moved in with my mother in Ohio by the end of May. She had lost by then about 12,000 followers and any leverage she had ever mistakenly imagined she had with our father. Thea and I were at his kitchen table when I read the text from me telling me about the divorce. Theo looked at me. I looked at him. "You didn't do this," he said. "I know. We sat with it anyway." The thing about my grandmother that nobody in our family ever bothered to learn was that she had been quietly feeding their children's school for 40 years. I found out on a warm Saturday in May, going through her desk. I had decided not to sell the house. I couldn't. I had told me, who had been running her bookstore out of a cramped storefront on Elm, that she could use the front 2 rooms for a second location. She had cried and then agreed and then brought over boxes. We were clearing drawers together when I found the notebook. It was small, soft leather, bound with an old brown shoelace. It slipped out from behind the drawer liner in the bottom right of her desk, the kind of hiding place you use when you do not want to be caught being kind. I opened it. Every page was a year. Each year had a line, 1,985 milk program $840, $1,986 milk $900. Textbooks $1,200, $1,987, milk $950, library $400. It went on for 40 years. The last entry was November of 2025. Milk books. A new set of drums for the music classroom. The running total at the bottom in her steady hand was $284,600. Briar Hollow Elementary, my school, the school I taught at. The school where Daniel, my 3rd grader, who would not speak in group work, drank a small carton of milk at every lunch because it was part of what the school called the nutrition program, which was fully funded each year by a private anonymous donor nobody had ever met. I sat down on the floor of her kitchen, and I put the notebook in my lap, and I did not move for an hour. A pressed leaf fell out of the back cover, an oak leaf. She had written under it, "Benji's first day, October 1984. I did not know who Benji was. I asked me later. Me looked at me a long moment and said, "Your father." He was a kindergartner. My grandmother had begun feeding the school the year after her son started there. She had fed it straight through his childhood, his adolescence, his graduation, his marriage, his children, his grandchildren. She had fed the school that fed us. She had never told a single one of us, including the one who spent her own days teaching inside it, who she had kept in dry erase markers for a decade without knowing. My mother sat at my kitchen table in February and looked for the first time in my life like someone who was not performing. She had come without calling. She had gotten in a bus from Ohio. She had walked the last mile from the station through slush in a coat that had been expensive 6 years ago and was now a coat. She knocked on my door the way a stranger knocks. Twice soft, I let her in. I made tea, I did not say very much. She had lost weight, not the way she used to diet, which was loud and announced. She had lost weight the way grief loses weight for you. Her hands shook on the cup. I read her letter. Eddie, okay. The one Mr. Haverson gave me after the reading. I didn't open it until last month. I couldn't. Okay. She tried to drink and set the cup down because she was crying silently the new way. She said she remembered a specific Tuesday in 1994 before you were born. She had come over and I had been short with her. She said she had understood. Her own mother-in-law had been difficult with her. She didn't want to pass that down. And she said, I forgive you, Linda. I have forgiven you for 30 years. My mother put her head on her arms on my kitchen table. I let her cry. I did not pat her shoulder. I did not say it was okay. I just made another pot of tea. When she looked up, her makeup was gone, and her face looked like it had before I was born. And I was for a second looking at a version of my mother I had never met. Eddie, I would never ask, but the SPA H100,000, I could save it. I would pay it back. I would. I looked at her. I did not feel angry. I felt honestly nothing sharp, just a kind of tired tenderness. Mom, I said, I'm not giving you money, she nodded. She had expected me to say it. But I'm going to set up a fund, I said, in her name for college. For any grandchild I have someday and for any child in Hollow Ridge who needs it. That's what I'll do with her money. That's what she would have wanted. She nodded again. She stood up. She hugged me small for 1 second. Then she left. I'm not angry anymore, Mom. I said at the door, I just don't know you. She did not turn around, but she nodded. I gave notice at Briar Hollow Elementary on a Tuesday, and by Friday, I had rented a small cottage in a town in Maine I had never set foot in. Mrs. Osgood did not try to talk me out of it. She had known me for 4 years. She had watched me come back from leave. She had watched me go through a trial. She had watched me keep teaching a class of 9-year-olds as if the ground were not shifting under my feet every morning. She accepted my resignation with a small, dry nod and said, You will be a good teacher wherever you go, Eddie. You already are. I set up the foundation with Haverson, $20 million, the Sylvia Usher Scholarship Fund. It would cover tuition, books, and milk for any student who needed it from elementary to college in Hollow Ridge County. Haverson wept quietly in his office when I signed the papers. The only time I ever saw him weep. He had loved her. I had always known. I did not sell the house. I could not. I deeded the right to use it to Mag for her lifetime for the bookstore. She named the new branch Sylvia's second reading. She painted the sign herself. I applied for a 4th grade position at an elementary school in Newbury Cove, Maine. It was a town I had picked out of a road atlas because the name sounded like something my grandmother would have liked. I did not visit first. I did a phone interview. They offered me the job 2 days later for $51,200 a year, which was the salary I had always had and the salary I intended to keep having. My father called once in June. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message asking if we could meet just the two of us, just for coffee. He said had things he wanted to say. I listened to the voicemail 3 times. Then I wrote him a single email. Dad, I am not going to stop loving the people you should have been, but I cannot keep writing the letter for you. Take care of yourself, Eddie. I did not send any of the versions where I tried to explain further. I did not send the version where I forgave him. I could not lie to him even now. I packed what fit in my car. It fit in my car. The first cup of coffee I drank in Maine was the worst cup of coffee I had ever had. And I laughed out loud in the parking lot. I had driven 2 days through New Hampshire, through the edge of Vermont, through the long, slow rise into Maine. The Subaru had a cough in fourth gear that I had been pretending was not worsening for 3 years. I had the corn yellow sweater in the front seat beside me folded because I had not been able to pack it in a box. I stopped at a roadside gas station somewhere south of Augusta. They had coffee in a pot that looked like it had been there since the Carter administration. I bought a cup. I drank it. It was objectively a disgrace. I stood in the parking lot and laughed, a real laugh, the kind I had not made in a year, and I startled a man putting air in his tire. I got to Newberry Cove in the late afternoon. The town was small, the way small towns are small. One main street, a post office, 2 diners, a feed store that had become a yarn store, a bakery that was closed on Tuesdays. The cottage I had rented sat on a bluff a half-mile out. Gray clapboard weathered porch with 2 rocking chairs, one of them missing a spindle. The landlord had left the key under the flower pot as promised. I unlocked the door. I stood in the hall. The cottage smelled of cedar and of the sea. It was empty. It was quiet. The kitchen had a cast iron stove I did not know how to use yet. The living room had one window that faced the Atlantic and a small uneven floor that creaked when I crossed it. I walked the corn yellow sweater into the living room. I draped it on theorem of the one chair that was already there, a green wingback left by the last tenant. The sleeve hung over the arm the way it used to hang over the arm of my grandmother's kitchen chair. I stood and looked at it for a long time. In the mailbox when I checked that evening was a single envelope, Me's handwriting. Inside was a card and a letter. The letter was brief. Eddie, Sylvia knew you would end up somewhere like this. She told me 10 years ago. She said, Eddie is a coastal soul. It just hasn't told her yet. Welcome home, Meg. By the next June, I had a 4th grade classroom that faced the Atlantic and a yellow cat who believed my grandmother's sweater belonged to him. The classroom was on the 2nd floor of the Newberry Cove Elementary School, a brick building from 1936 with floors that squeaked in 8 specific places, all of which my students learned to skip over on the way to the pencil sharpener. My class had 18 students. One of them was a quiet girl named Rosie who did not speak in group work. I gave her patience. I gave her Saturdays in the form of extra 20-minute conversations after school on Tuesdays. She started by May to raise her hand. The first awards of the Sylvia Usher Scholarship Fund went out in April. 47 students. I read every application. 2 of them were children from the Briar Hollow Milk program my grandmother had been paying for since before they were born. I cried quietly over both files. I signed both approvals. Mag drove up in early June with a mason jar of jam from the garden. She stayed 3 days. She sat on my porch and read a paperback and did not talk more than was required. She was 80 years old. She looked on my porch like a woman who had decided to live to 100 out of spite. Richard sent me a birthday card on the 14th of July. It was the first birthday card he had sent me in 10 years. The card was generic. Happy birthday, daughter. On the inside, in his cramped handwriting, he had written 4 words. I hope you're well. I did not write back. I did not tear it up either. I put it in a drawer in the kitchen. I do not know why. I think I will know someday. The cat arrived in late June, skinny and yellow with a torn ear and a steady, skeptical way of looking at a person. He walked in through the screen door I had not properly latched. He got onto the corn yellow sweater on the wing-back chair. He went to sleep. I did not have the heart to move him. I named him Cather. He slept on the sweater every night. Every morning, I had to ask his permission to borrow it. He would look at me with a single half-open yellow eye as if he had inherited the memory directly and was only tolerating my use of it on loan. On a Saturday in August, I sat on a porch that belonged to me and wrote a letter that didn't need to be mailed. The sun was going down over the bay. It was going down 10 minutes later than it had gone down behind my grandmother's hill. I had been keeping track of that for some reason. I had sat through all 10 minutes of it that night. The way you sit through the credits of a film you don't want to end, the letter was to her. I told her about the classroom, about Rosie, about the 8 squeaky floorboards, about the day the principal brought donuts, about Cather and the sweater, and the way he looked at me. I told her I had figured something out. I had not won because I had money. I had money now, and most of it was not mine and never would be. I had one because I had known when it mattered how to sit still with a person who was leaving, because I had come on Saturdays for no reason, because I had put the check in my purse instead of the fire, because when she had asked me sitting in her garden in October what I would do with $1 million, I had said I would buy dry erase markers for my class. And she had looked at me the way a person looks at an answer they have been waiting their whole life to hear. I folded the letter. I put it in the small wooden box she had kept by her chair on Christmas Eve, the one I had brought with me to Maine. I closed the lid. I stood up. Cather through the open window looked at me with the patient disdain of a creature who was ready for his dinner. Coming, I said. I went inside. If this story has reached you, if anywhere in your life there has been someone who loved you more than you knew how to receive it, please tell me in the comments below. Tell me their name and what they taught you about quiet kindness. I read everyone and I carry them with me. If you would like to hear another story about boundaries, inheritance, and the women who choose to walk instead of stay, the next one is waiting for you in the description, and it begins with another check. Come with me.